The last photograph Sarah Thompson ever put on Instagram showed her beaming smile against the backdrop of Yellowstone's entrance sign. "Yellowstone calling, ready for adventure with my love." Read the caption beneath the image of her and David, both wearing their matching navy hiking jackets and wide grins. 52 people liked the post. Several friends commented with encouraging messages. "Stay safe out there," and "can't wait to see the photos." None of them could have imagined that this cheerful snapshot, uploaded at 8:47 a.m. on the 12th of June, 2015, would become the final digital trace of Sarah Thompson's existence. 10 years later, when the truth finally emerged from the depths of a forgotten cave, it would shatter everything her family thought they knew about that fateful weekend. The revelation would prove that sometimes the greatest dangers lurk not in the wilderness, but in the hearts of those we trust most. Sarah Elizabeth Thompson, 35 years old, was not the sort of person who took unnecessary risks. As a registered nurse at Bozeman Health, she had witnessed firsthand the consequences of poor preparation and reckless decisions. Her colleagues knew her as meticulous, always double-checking medication doses in patient charts. This same careful nature extended to her personal life, particularly when it came to outdoor adventures with her husband of 8 years. David Michael Thompson, 38, embodied the same methodical approach to life. His 15-year career as an environmental engineer had taken him to remote conservation sites across Montana and Wyoming, where a single miscalculation could mean the difference between life and death. Colleagues at the Montana Department of Environmental Quality respected his thoroughness, his ability to assess risks, and plan accordingly. He was the kind of man who carried backup equipment for his backup equipment. Together, Sarah and David formed what friends often called the perfect outdoor couple. They had met during a wilderness first aid course 7 years earlier, bonding over their shared love of hiking and their mutual respect for nature's unpredictable power. Their Bozeman home was filled with carefully maintained gear, GPS units, emergency beacons, water purification tablets, and detailed topographic maps marked with their previous adventures. The couple had visited Yellowstone National Park 11 times over the past 5 years, but the Lamar River Trail held special significance for them. It was where David had proposed 3 years earlier, dropping to one knee beside a crystalline stream while elk grazed peacefully in the distance. They had returned twice since then, always during the same week in June, when wildflowers carpeted the meadows and wildlife activity peaked. Their friends and family had no reason for concern when the couple announced their latest Yellowstone expedition. This wasn't some spontaneous adventure or poorly planned outing. David had spent weeks studying weather patterns, trail conditions, and wildlife activity reports. Sarah had meticulously packed their supplies, creating detailed inventories and backup plans for every conceivable scenario. On the morning of the 12th of June, 2015, David loaded their black Ford Explorer with the precision of a military operation. Emergency position indicating radio beacon, check. Satellite GPS with extra batteries, check. 3 days worth of food, plus 2 emergency meals, check. First aid kit updated with fresh supplies, check. The couple's preparation bordered on obsessive, but it had kept them safe through dozens of wilderness excursions. The drive from Bozeman to Yellowstone's northeast entrance took them through rolling Montana countryside painted in early summer green. Sarah dozed fitfully in the passenger seat, her head resting against the window as David navigated the familiar route. She had worked a 12-hour shift the previous day, caring for a constant stream of patients in the hospital's emergency department. This weekend was her reward, a chance to disconnect from the chaos of medical emergencies and reconnect with the natural world that restored her spirit. David's phone received its last cellular signal at 9:03 a.m. as they approached the park's boundary. He had already sent the traditional text message to Sarah's younger sister, Lisa, heading into the wilderness. "Love you, and the kids. Back Monday." It was a ritual they had established years earlier, a simple message that served as both goodbye and promise of return. At the Lamar River trailhead, the couple followed their established routine. With practiced efficiency, David filled out the backcountry permit while Sarah organized their packs one final time. The trail register, a weathered wooden box mounted beside the parking area, recorded their information in David's careful handwriting. Sarah and David Thompson. 3-day hike along Lamar River. Return date, June 15, 2015. Emergency contact, Lisa Martinez 406-555-5147. Park regulations required all overnight hikers to register their planned routes and return dates. The system was designed to trigger search and rescue operations if hikers failed to check out on schedule. David had never missed a return date in 15 years of backcountry hiking. Sarah had never given her sister cause for worry. The EPIRB device clipped to David's pack represented the latest in emergency technology. Unlike older personal locator beacons, this unit could transmit distress signals directly to search and rescue satellites, providing precise GPS coordinates, even in areas without cellular coverage. The device had cost them nearly $800, but they considered it essential insurance for their wilderness adventures. Weather conditions on the 12th of June appeared ideal for hiking. The National Weather Service forecast called for partly cloudy skies with temperatures in the comfortable 60 degrees range, around 15 degrees Celsius. A slight chance of afternoon thunderstorms was mentioned, but nothing that would concern experienced hikers. The couple had weathered far worse conditions during their previous expeditions. What the forecast failed to predict was the atmospheric anomaly developing over the Yellowstone region. A collision between warm, moist air from the Pacific and a sudden cold front from Canada would create a weather system of unusual intensity. Within hours, the slight chance of thunderstorms would escalate into a deluge capable of reshaping the landscape itself. At 9:15 a.m., Sarah and David shouldered their packs and set off down the Lamar River Trail. The path wound through sage-covered hills dotted with wildflowers, offering spectacular views of the Absaroka Mountains in the distance. Early morning sunlight filtered through scattered clouds, creating a patchwork of light and shadow across the valley floor. Sarah's Instagram post captured the last moment of their normal lives. In the photograph, both hikers appeared confident and prepared, their faces showing the eager anticipation of adventurers about to embark on a familiar journey. David's arm rested protectively around Sarah's shoulders, while her free hand held up their permit in a playful gesture toward the camera. A family from Ohio, preparing for their own day hike, later recalled seeing the couple disappear down the trail. Around 9:20 a.m. The witnesses remembered thinking how well-equipped and professional the pair appeared, noting their matching packs and obvious experience. It was exactly the kind of observation that would later haunt search and rescue teams trying to understand how such well-prepared hikers could simply vanish. The first few miles of the Lamar River Trail passed through relatively open terrain, following ancient game paths that had been used by wildlife for thousands of years. Sarah and David moved at their usual steady pace, stopping occasionally to photograph particularly striking wildflower displays or distant wildlife. Their GPS unit dutifully recorded their progress, creating an electronic breadcrumb trail that would later become crucial evidence. By 11:30 a.m., the couple had reached the point where the trail began its descent into the more secluded river valley. Here, towering cliff faces rose on both sides, creating a natural corridor that channeled both water and wind. It was in this section that cellular signals typically disappeared entirely, cutting off all electronic communication with the outside world. David's final text message, sent at 11:27 a.m. from a small ridge with marginally better reception, was characteristically brief. Beautiful morning. Making good time. Love you both. The message reached Sarah's sister, Lisa, as she was preparing lunch for her two young children, a mundane moment that would later be remembered as the last confirmed communication from the missing hikers. The weather began changing around noon, though initially, the signs were subtle. Clouds that had been scattered and white gradually thickened and darkened. The temperature, which had been rising steadily since sunrise, suddenly plateaued and then began dropping. Experienced hikers like Sarah and David would have recognized these signs, but the changes occurred gradually enough that they might not have seemed immediately threatening. What they could not have anticipated was the unusual atmospheric instability developing overhead. The collision of air masses was creating conditions similar to those that spawned tornadoes on the Great Plains, but adapted to the unique geography of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Instead of rotating winds, this system would produce something even more dangerous for hikers: a stationary deluge of unprecedented intensity. The first raindrops began falling at 12:43 p.m. According to weather station data later analyzed by investigators, within minutes. What had started as a light sprinkle escalated into a steady shower, then quickly intensified into the kind of downpour that transforms mountain streams into raging torrents. The couple's final GPS ping, recorded at 12:51 p.m., placed them approximately 4 miles from the trailhead, in a section of the valley known for its unstable soil composition. Sarah and David had experienced mountain storms before, but this was different. The rain fell with tropical intensity, overwhelming the area's natural drainage systems within minutes. Streams that had been ankle-deep suddenly became chest-deep torrents. Hillsides that had been stable for decades began sliding as water saturated the underlying clay layers. Somewhere in that chaos of wind and water, two of the most prepared hikers ever to enter Yellowstone National Park made their final decisions as free people. The GPS unit that had faithfully tracked their progress fell silent. The EPIRB that was supposed to guarantee their rescue remained ominously inactive. And Sarah Elizabeth Thompson, who had promised her sister she would be home by Monday evening, stepped into a nightmare that would consume the next 10 years of her family's life. Lisa Martinez felt the first prickle of unease on Monday evening, the 15th of June, at exactly 6:47 p.m. She had been preparing dinner for her children, absent-mindedly glancing at her phone every few minutes, expecting the familiar chime of a text message from her sister. Sarah and David were supposed to return from their Yellowstone trip that afternoon. And Sarah had never failed to send the traditional, "We're safe," message upon reaching their car. By 8:30 p.m., Lisa's unease had crystallized into genuine worry. She tried calling Sarah's mobile phone, listening to it ring endlessly before going to voicemail. David's phone did the same. This wasn't unusual in itself. The couple often returned from hiking trips with dead batteries and spotty service, but Sarah had always found a way to communicate, even if it meant driving to the nearest town to send a quick text. The night passed slowly for Lisa. She told herself that maybe they had decided to stay an extra day, or perhaps their car had broken down in some area without cell service. These rationalizations carried her through the dark hours, but when Tuesday morning arrived, without word, she knew something was wrong. At 7:15 a.m. on the 16th of June, Lisa made the call that would transform a family's private worry into a full-scale emergency. Park County Sheriff's Department dispatcher Janet Walsh recorded the conversation, noting the caller's controlled panic and detailed information about the missing hikers. Lisa provided their vehicle description, license plate number, planned route, an exact return date with the precision of someone who understood that details could mean the difference between life and death. Deputy Mike Harrison reached the Lamar River trailhead at 9:23 a.m., his patrol vehicle kicking up dust as it pulled into the gravel parking area. The black Ford Explorer sat exactly where Sarah and David had left it 4 days earlier, undisturbed and locked. Morning sunlight reflected off the windshield, creating an almost peaceful scene that belied the growing emergency. Harrison's initial inspection revealed no signs of foul play or forced entry. The vehicle's interior remained pristine, with Sarah's purse sitting on the front seat, containing her wallet, credit cards, and a partially eaten granola bar. Their spare change of clothes hung neatly in the back alongside a small cooler with leftover snacks. Everything suggested an orderly departure for what was supposed to be a routine hiking trip. The trail register confirmed their departure time and planned route. David's careful handwriting stood out among the hasty scrawls of other hikers, detailing their 3-day itinerary with characteristic precision. The deputy noted that no other hikers had signed out from the same route, meaning Sarah and David should have been alone in that section of the wilderness. By 10:45 a.m., the missing persons report had been escalated to the National Park Service. Yellowstone's search and rescue team, led by veteran coordinator Jake Mitchell, began mobilizing resources for what they hoped would be a routine extraction of hikers who had simply got lost or injured. Mitchell had overseen hundreds of similar operations over his 15-year career, and most ended with embarrassed but grateful hikers being guided back to safety. The first search team entered the Lamar River Trail at 11:30 a.m., consisting of 4 experienced rangers equipped with GPS units, emergency medical supplies, and communication equipment. Their initial optimism was tempered by reports of the unusual storm that had struck the area over the weekend. Several other trail systems had reported significant washouts and landslides, suggesting that conditions in the backcountry might be more challenging than usual. Dr. Rachel Stevens, a local emergency physician and volunteer with the search team, joined the operation that afternoon. She brought not only medical expertise, but also intimate knowledge of the psychological patterns of lost hikers. In her experience, people like Sarah and David experienced, well-prepared outdoor enthusiasts rarely made the kinds of mistakes that led to serious trouble. Their disappearance suggested either a medical emergency or some catastrophic environmental event. The search dogs arrived on Wednesday morning, their handlers optimistic about the scent trail, despite the intervening rainstorm. Max, a 7-year-old German Shepherd with an exceptional record of wilderness recoveries, immediately picked up a strong scent near the trailhead. His behavior suggested recent human activity, and he began following the official trail with confidence and determination. For the first 2 miles, Max's progress matched the couple's known route exactly. The dog's steady pace and focused demeanor encouraged the handlers, who had seen similar patterns in dozens of successful rescues. However, as they approached the section where the trail descended into the river valley, Max's behavior began to change. His movements became more erratic, circling back on himself and showing signs of confusion that suggested the scent trail had been disrupted. The breakthrough came at 2:17 p.m., when searcher Tom Bradley spotted something blue caught in branches along the swollen Lamar River. The object turned out to be Sarah's distinctive hiking cap, the one she had been wearing in her final Instagram photo. The cap was waterlogged and torn, bearing evidence of violent contact with rocks and debris during the flood that had transformed the usually gentle stream into a destructive torrent. Finding the cap shifted the search parameters dramatically. Instead of looking for lost hikers who might be signaling for help from some ridge or meadow, the teams now faced the possibility that Sarah and David had been caught in the flash flooding that had reshaped much of the valley. Helicopter pilots reported extensive washouts and debris fields throughout the area, with several sections of trail completely obliterated by rushing water. On Thursday, the search expanded to include thermal imaging equipment mounted on aircraft capable of detecting body heat from altitudes of several thousand feet. The infrared sensors swept across miles of wilderness, searching for the distinctive signatures of human beings among the natural background of wildlife and vegetation. Each anomaly triggered ground teams to investigate. But hours of careful searching revealed only elk, deer, and the occasional bear. Max's handler, Maria Santos, made a disturbing discovery on Friday morning. The German Shepherd had led his team to a rocky outcropping approximately 3 miles from where Sarah's had been found. Here, the dog exhibited the specific behavior pattern Santos had learned to recognize over 8 years of search and rescue work, the alert posture that indicated he had found human scent, but not necessarily living humans. The scent trail ended abruptly at a cliff face, where recent rockfall had created a jumbled landscape of boulders and loose stone. Santos and her team searched the area meticulously, looking for any sign that the missing hikers had passed through this location. They found traces of fabric caught on sharp rocks and what appeared to be boot prints in dried mud, but no clear indication of what had happened to Sarah and David. Weather continued to hamper the search efforts. Additional thunderstorms moved through the region, creating dangerous conditions for both ground teams and aircraft. Lightning strikes forced several evacuations, while renewed rainfall threatened to wash away any remaining evidence. The narrow windows of safe searching time grew shorter each day as the summer storm pattern established itself over the greater Yellowstone region. By the weekend, more than 50 people were involved in the search operation. Local volunteers joined professional rescue teams combing through areas that aircraft couldn't reach effectively. The Bozeman hiking community rallied around the effort, with dozens of Sarah and David's friends contributing their local knowledge and determination to find the missing couple. Lisa arrived at the search command post on Saturday morning, her face drawn with sleepless worry, but her voice steady with resolve. She brought photographs of her sister and brother-in-law, recent pictures that showed their faces clearly for the growing media coverage. More importantly, she brought detailed information about their habits, preferences, and decision-making patterns that might help searchers predict their likely actions. During an emergency, David always carries backup equipment, Lisa told the search coordinators. If their primary GPS failed, he would have had a paper map and compass. Sarah's medical training means she wouldn't panic in a crisis. They would have made rational decisions based on their situation. The search teams appreciated Lisa's insights, but her confidence in her family's preparedness only deepened the mystery. Well-equipped, experienced, with emergency training, they didn't simply vanish without trace, especially when carrying an EPIRB beacon specifically designed to prevent exactly this scenario. On Sunday, Jake Mitchell made the decision that marked the beginning of the end for the active search phase. Weather conditions had deteriorated again, with dangerous lightning activity making aircraft operations impossible. Ground teams had covered every accessible area within a 5-mile radius of the couple's last known position, finding only Sarah's hat and a few ambiguous traces that might or might not have belonged to them. The EPIRB remained the most troubling aspect of the case. David's emergency beacon should have activated automatically if they were in genuine distress, transmitting GPS coordinates directly to rescue satellites. The device had been tested before their departure and was known to be in perfect working condition. Its silence suggested either that the couple was not in immediate danger, or that something had prevented the beacon from functioning. Technical specialists examined various theories for the EPIRB's failure. The device might have been damaged in a fall or flood, or perhaps geological features were blocking its transmission signals. Some rescue experts suggested that the couple might be in a location where the beacon couldn't achieve satellite contact, such as a deep cave or narrow canyon. All of these explanations were possible, but none fully satisfied the experienced searchers who had seen emergency beacons save lives in seemingly impossible situations. As the second week of searching began, Mitchell faced the difficult reality that active rescue efforts would have to be scaled back. The massive deployment of personnel and equipment couldn't be sustained indefinitely, especially when several other emergencies were developing elsewhere in the greater Yellowstone region. The search would continue, but with fewer resources and a different focus. On Tuesday, the 23rd of June, 11 days after Sarah and David had disappeared, the intensive phase of the search operation officially ended. A press conference announced that while search efforts would continue on a reduced scale, the hundreds of person-hours and extensive technical resources had failed to locate any definitive trace of the missing hikers beyond Sarah's damaged hat. Lisa stood beside Jake Mitchell as he delivered the news to assembled reporters and family friends. Her composure finally cracked as she heard the words that transformed her sister and brother-in-law from missing persons into something far more ominous. The active search was ending, but the questions were just beginning. Where were Sarah and David Thompson? How could two experienced hikers with excellent equipment simply disappear in a well-traveled area of America's most famous national park? The case file would remain open, joining dozens of others in Yellowstone's unfortunate collection of unsolved disappearances. But for Lisa, and for the community that had rallied around the search effort, the end of active operations marked the beginning of a different kind of ordeal, the long wait for answers that might never come. The transformation from active emergency to cold case happened with bureaucratic efficiency, but emotional devastation. Within weeks of the search operation's conclusion, Sarah and David Thompson's disappearance joined the grim statistics of America's national parks, one of approximately 1,600 people who vanish in these protected wilderness areas each year, most never to be found. Lisa Martinez refused to accept this statistical reality. While official resources shifted to other emergencies, she embarked on her own relentless campaign to keep her sister's case alive in the public consciousness. Her first step was hiring private investigator Marcus Webb, a former FBI agent who specialized in cold cases involving missing persons. Webb's reputation was built on his methodical approach and refusal to accept convenient explanations when evidence suggested more complex scenarios. Webb's initial review of the case file raised several questions that had been overshadowed by the urgency of the search operation. The EPIRB's silence remained the most troubling element, but he also noted inconsistencies in the timeline and weather reports that deserved closer examination. His investigation would span several months and cost Lisa her life savings, but it established patterns that would prove crucial years later. The private investigator's financial records analysis revealed no unusual activity in Sarah and David's accounts. No large withdrawals, no suspicious transfers, no evidence of financial distress that might motivate a voluntary disappearance. Their credit cards remained unused after the 12th of June. Their bank accounts untouched, except for automatic deposits from their employers. Webb's conclusion was unambiguous. Whatever had happened to the couple, it wasn't related to money problems or voluntary flight. Meanwhile, the story of the missing hikers began to attract attention beyond the immediate Yellowstone region. Local newspapers ran feature articles about the search effort, emphasizing the couple's experience and preparation. The contrast between their obvious competence and their mysterious disappearance made for compelling reading, and the story was picked up by regional media outlets across the Mountain West. Social media platforms became unofficial investigation centers, where amateur sleuths dissected every available detail. Reddit's Unresolved Mysteries forum dedicated multiple threads to the Thompson case, with users analyzing topographic maps, weather data, and wildlife patterns. Facebook groups formed specifically to coordinate volunteer search efforts and share theories about what might have happened during those crucial hours on the 12th of June. The online speculation ranged from plausible to bizarre. Some contributors focused on environmental factors, flash floods, landslides, or encounters with dangerous wildlife. Others suggested more sinister possibilities involving human predators or government cover-ups. A particularly persistent theory involved UFO abduction, citing Yellowstone's history of unexplained phenomena and the couple's sudden disappearance without trace. Lisa found herself caught between gratitude for the public attention and frustration with the wilder theories grew. Lisa appreciated that strangers cared enough about her sister to spend time researching the case. Yet the conspiracy theories and supernatural explanations felt like betrayals of Sarah and David's memory. They had been real people with lives built on rationality, not characters in some paranormal mystery. The family's annual memorial service, held each year on the 12th of June at the Lamar River trailhead, became a focal point for both genuine mourning and a rather morbid curiosity. Lisa organized these gatherings as intimate ceremonies to honor her sister's memory, yet they inevitably attracted amateur sleuths, psychics, and others drawn by the unsolved mystery. The very presence of strangers with cameras and recording equipment turned private grief into a very public spectacle. Professional interest in the case peaked in 2018 when Lost in the Wild a popular true crime podcast, devoted a 3-part series to the Thompson disappearance. The host, Jennifer Morrison, conducted extensive interviews with members of the search team, park officials, and family friends, creating the most comprehensive public examination of the case to date. The podcast episodes were downloaded more than 2 million times, introducing Sarah and David's story to a global audience. Morrison's investigation uncovered several details that hadn't received adequate attention during the original search. Weather records from the 12th of June, 2015, showed that the storm system had been more severe than initially reported, with rainfall rates exceeding anything recorded in the region during the previous decade. Geological surveys conducted after the flooding revealed extensive soil instability throughout the Lamar River Valley, with several areas experiencing significant terrain changes. The podcast also highlighted the statistical improbability of the couple's disappearance. Yellowstone's backcountry, whilst vast and sometimes dangerous, is hardly an impenetrable wilderness. Experienced hikers with proper equipment rarely vanish completely, especially when following established trails in areas regularly patrolled by park personnel. The combination of their preparation, the emergency beacon, and the intensive search effort should have been sufficient to locate them, dead or alive. Lisa's determination to find answers led her to explore increasingly desperate measures. She consulted psychics and dowsers, hoping that unconventional methods might succeed where traditional search techniques had failed. Most of these encounters proved futile, but they reflected her unwillingness to accept that her sister might never be found. The rational part of her mind knew that closure might be impossible, yet love demanded that she continue trying. In 2019, a development briefly rekindled hope when hikers discovered a woman's bracelet near Mirror Lake, approximately 15 miles from the Thompsons' last known position. The jewelry bore an inscription that initially seemed to match Sarah's wedding anniversary date, leading to speculation that the couple had somehow traveled much further than anyone had imagined. DNA analysis eventually proved that the bracelet belonged to someone else, but the false alarm demonstrated how desperately everyone wanted the mystery to be solved. The bracelet incident also revealed how the case had evolved beyond its original parameters. Sarah and David Thompson were no longer simply missing persons, they had become symbols of all the unanswered questions that haunt America's wilderness areas. Their story represented every family's fear about loved ones who venture into remote places and never return, every searcher's frustration with cases that defy logical explanation. Local businesses in the Yellowstone region developed complicated relationships with the ongoing mystery. Some entrepreneurs capitalized on the notoriety by offering missing hiker tours that included stops at significant locations from the search effort. Others, particularly those dependent on tourism revenue, worried that unsolved disappearances might discourage visitors from exploring the park's backcountry areas. Park Service officials found themselves in an equally difficult position. They had devoted substantial resources to the search operation and continued to investigate any new leads that emerged, but they also had to balance public safety concerns with the reality that wilderness areas inherently carry risks. Excessive focus on rare tragedies could undermine the broader mission of encouraging Americans to experience and appreciate their natural heritage. Marcus Webb's investigation concluded after 18 months with a comprehensive report that satisfied no one, yet his findings confirmed that Sarah and David had entered the wilderness as planned, that they were well prepared and experienced, and that they had encountered an unusually severe weather event. Beyond these basic facts, the evidence supported multiple theories but proved none definitively. Webb's final interview with Lisa was conducted in her kitchen on a snowy February evening in 2017. The private investigator had exhausted his leads and spent Lisa's money without producing the answers she desperately wanted. His parting words carried the weight of professional experience with unsolved cases and personal sympathy for a grieving sister. Sometimes people just disappear, Webb told her. It doesn't mean there isn't an explanation, just that we haven't found it yet. The wilderness keeps some secrets, at least for a while. Lisa continued her vigil alone. After Webb's investigation ended, she maintained Sarah's social media accounts, posting annual remembrance messages and sharing any new developments related to the case. She kept their childhood home exactly as her sister had left it, preserving clothes and personal items against the possibility that Sarah might somehow return to reclaim them. The years brought small developments that raised hopes only to dash them again. Trail cameras occasionally captured images of solitary figures in remote areas, leading to speculation about hermit survivors living off the land. Bones discovered by Hikers generated excitement until forensic analysis revealed them to be from wildlife rather than humans. Each false lead reopened wounds that had barely begun to heal. By 2020, 5 years after the disappearance, media interest had largely moved on to more recent mysteries. The Thompson case joined thousands of others in the vast archive of unsolved disappearances, referenced occasionally in articles about missing person statistics but no longer generating headlines or podcast episodes. For Lisa, this transition from public mystery to private grief was both a relief and a form of abandonment. The COVID-19 pandemic disrupted even the annual memorial services, forcing Lisa to mark the anniversary alone at the trailhead where her sister had last been seen. Standing in that empty car park, surrounded by wilderness that had swallowed two of the most important people in her world, she finally began to accept that answers might never come. The mountains kept their secrets, and time was eroding the evidence more effectively than any cover-up could have managed. Yet something deep in Lisa's heart refused to surrender completely. Perhaps it was intuition. Perhaps merely stubborn love, but she maintained her conviction that the truth existed somewhere in those vast spaces. She couldn't explain why she felt so certain, but she believed that eventually, somehow, Sarah and David would be found. When that day came, she intended to be ready with questions that had been burning inside her for years. The wilderness had taken her sister and brother-in-law, but it would not take her hope. Not yet. Dr. Elena Vasquez had spent 15 years studying the geological formations of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Yet the 23rd of July, 2025, would forever mark the most significant discovery of her career. She and her research partner, Dr. James Chen from the University of Montana's Earth Sciences Department, were conducting a routine geological survey in a remote section of the Lamar Valley when they stumbled upon something that would finally answer questions that had haunted a family for exactly 10 years and 12 days. The two geologists had been documenting changes in the landscape caused by the unprecedented flooding that had struck the region in June 2015. Their research focused on how extreme weather events could alter geological structures over time, creating new formations whilst destroying others. What they hadn't expected to find was evidence of human tragedy preserved in stone and silence. The morning had started like dozens of others during their summer research season. Vasquez and Chen hiked into areas that few people ever visited, carrying specialized equipment to measure soil composition, rock stability, and erosion patterns. Their work was methodical and unglamorous, the kind of scientific field work that rarely made headlines but contributed essential data to understanding how landscapes respond to climate change. At approximately 10:30 a.m., Chen noticed an anomaly in the terrain that didn't match the geological patterns they had been documenting. What appeared to be a natural rock formation showed signs of recent disturbance, loose stones and altered vegetation that suggested the area had been reshaped by more than just normal erosion processes. Closer examination revealed something extraordinary, a small cave opening that had been completely hidden by rockfall and overgrown vegetation. The entrance was barely large enough for a person to squeeze through, camouflaged so effectively that it would have been invisible to searchers passing just a few feet away. Only the trained eyes of geologists, looking for subtle signs of structural change, had been able to detect its existence. Chen's geological experience told him that this cave formation was relatively recent, probably created by the same seismic activity that had accompanied the severe flooding of 2015. The rockfall that concealed the entrance bore the characteristic patterns of rapid displacement, suggesting that whatever lay inside had been sealed off suddenly and violently during the catastrophic weather event. Vasquez felt an inexplicable sense of unease as they prepared to explore the cave. Something about the location seemed familiar, although she couldn't immediately place why. It wasn't until she checked their GPS coordinates against her research maps that the significance became clear. They were working in an area that had been extensively searched during a major rescue operation exactly 10 years earlier. The cave opening required both geologists to remove several large rocks and clear away years of accumulated debris before they could gain access. The work was painstaking, complicated by the instability of the surrounding rock formation. Chen's expertise in structural geology proved crucial in determining which stones could be safely moved without triggering additional collapse. As sunlight penetrated the cave for the first time in a decade, both scientists immediately knew they had discovered something far more significant than geological formations. The beam from Vasquez's headlamp illuminated a scene that had been preserved in perfect, terrible detail by the dry cave environment and its protective rockfall, two human skeletons lying side by side in what had once been a small, natural shelter. The remains were positioned as if the individuals had died peacefully, perhaps holding each other during their final moments. Around them lay the remnants of camping equipment, a torn and faded tent, collapsed rucksacks, and various personal items that spoke to a desperate attempt at survival in impossible circumstances. Yet it was the waterproof notebook, still intact after 10 years in the cave's protected environment, that would prove most significant. The journal lay near one of the skeletons, its pages filled with careful handwriting that documented the final days of two people whose disappearance had become one of Yellowstone's most enduring mysteries. Chen immediately recognized the importance of their discovery and the need to preserve the scene, for despite the remote location and apparent natural causes, this was still a potential crime investigation. Both geologists photographed everything in detail before touching anything, documenting the exact position of remains and artifacts with scientific precision. The first page of the notebook contained identifying information that confirmed what both scientists had already suspected. David M. Thompson. Emergency contact, Lisa Martinez 406-555-147 inch. These were the remains of Sarah and David Thompson, the experienced hikers who had vanished during the catastrophic storm of the 12th of June, 2015. Park Service officials arrived within 3 hours of the geologist's emergency call, followed closely by county coroner staff and FBI investigators specializing in cold case recoveries. The cave became the center of intense activity as professionals worked to document and recover evidence that had been waiting a decade to tell its story. The journal entries, written in David's neat, engineering handwriting, provided a devastating chronology of the couple's final week. The early entries from the 12th and 13th of June documented their growing realization that they were trapped by landslides and rising water, cut off from their planned route back to the trailhead. June 12th, evening, storm much worse than predicted. Stream crossing impossible due to flooding. Found shelter in small cave. Emergency beacon activated, but signal may be blocked by rock formations. Sarah calm and optimistic. We have enough food for several days if we ration carefully. The next day's entry revealed the full scope of their situation. June 13th, explored possible exit routes. Cave mouth blocked by rockfall from last night's continuing storms. Emergency beacon still not responding, possibly damaged or signals blocked. Sarah injured her ankle attempting to climb over debris. We're conserving energy and water while waiting for rescue teams to locate our signal. David's engineering background showed in his methodical approach to their crisis. He had calculated their food and water supplies, estimated the time required for various rescue scenarios, and maintained detailed records of their physical condition and morale. Even facing death, he had continued to apply rational problem-solving methods to their impossible situation. By the 14th of June, their situation had deteriorated significantly. Water running low, Sarah's ankle worse, possibly fractured. Cave-in yesterday sealed our only potential exit route. Still hoping rescue teams can trace emergency beacon signal, but beginning to consider that device may not be functioning. Sarah remains brave, but I can see fear in her eyes when she thinks I'm not watching. The most heartbreaking entries came from the final days when both hikers realized that rescue was unlikely and their supplies were exhausted. David's handwriting became less steady, reflecting the physical and emotional toll of their ordeal, but his devotion to Sarah remained constant throughout. June 15th. This was supposed to be our return date. Lisa will be worried by now. Search teams should be looking for us, but we've seen no helicopters or heard no voices. Sarah's sleeping more frequently. Thinks it's from the ankle pain, but I suspect dehydration. I try to stay optimistic for her sake, but our situation is deteriorating. The penultimate entry, dated the 16th of June, revealed the depth of their love in the tragedy of their circumstances. Sarah, weaker today, shared last of our water this morning. She made me promise to tell her sister how much she loves her if I somehow survive, and she doesn't. I promised, but we both know we're facing this together. 10 years of marriage, and I still can't imagine existing without her. The final entry, written in increasingly shaky handwriting, was dated the 17th of June. Sarah passed peacefully in her sleep this morning. Her last words were about the sunrise streaming into the cave, said it was beautiful. Like the first morning of our honeymoon. I don't have the strength to continue alone, and I don't want to. We came into this wilderness together, and we'll leave it together. Lisa, take care of yourself. Sarah loved you more than words could express. We both did. Forensic examination would later confirm that both hikers had died from dehydration and exposure, with Sarah succumbing first, due to complications from her ankle injury and subsequent infection. David had survived for perhaps 12 to 18 hours longer, using his final strength to record their story and arrange Sarah's body in a peaceful position before lying down beside her. The emergency beacon device was found among their equipment, its casing cracked and internal components damaged by moisture that had seeped into the cave during the early days of their ordeal. Technical analysis revealed that whilst the device had briefly transmitted a distress signal on the 12th of June, the signal had been too weak and intermittent to provide searchers with accurate location data. The geological formation of the cave, combined with the device's partial failure, had created the perfect conditions for a rescue beacon to fail at the worst possible moment. Yet there was something else in the cave that would transform this tragic discovery into something far more sinister. As investigators carefully catalogued every item in the shelter, they found evidence that would turn a story of natural disaster and heroic love into a criminal investigation that would shock everyone who had followed the case for 10 years. Near David's remains, partially concealed beneath debris from the cave roof, investigators discovered a handgun that clearly didn't belong to the couple's carefully inventoried equipment. More disturbing still, forensic examination of the cave walls revealed a bullet impact point in the rock face, along with lead fragments that matched the weapon found at the scene. The presence of the gun raised immediate questions about the nature of the couple's deaths. Had David used the weapon to end Sarah's suffering and then his own? The journal entries suggested they had died peacefully from natural causes, yet physical evidence now suggested a more complex and potentially violent conclusion to their ordeal. Further examination of the remains would be required to determine the exact cause of death, but the discovery had already transformed what seemed like a tragic, but straightforward case of hikers overcome by natural disaster into something much more complex and disturbing. After 10 years of questions, the Thompson case was about to reveal secrets that would prove far darker than anyone had imagined. The forensic examination of Sarah and David Thompson's remains began at the Montana State Crime Laboratory on the 26th of July, 2025, under the direction of Dr. Patricia Reeves, the state's most experienced forensic pathologist. What had initially appeared to be a tragic, but straightforward case of hikers overcome by natural disaster was about to reveal layers of deception and betrayal that would shock everyone who had followed the case for 10 years. Dr. Reeves' preliminary examination immediately challenged the assumptions drawn from David's journal entries. Whilst both skeletons showed clear signs of malnutrition and dehydration consistent with their ordeal in the cave, Sarah's remains bore evidence of trauma that hadn't been mentioned in any of the diary entries. A small hole in her skull, barely visible to the naked eye, but unmistakable under magnification, indicated that she had died from a gunshot wound rather than natural causes. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigative team. If Sarah had been shot, it meant that David's final journal entries were either deliberate deceptions, or that something far more sinister had occurred in that cave during their final days. The forensic evidence was Unambiguous, Sarah Thompson had been killed by a bullet fired from close range, most likely whilst she lay helpless with her injured ankle. Detective Maria Santos, who had been assigned to coordinate the reopened investigation, found herself facing a completely different type of case than anyone had anticipated. Instead of documenting a tragic accident, she was now investigating what appeared to be either a murder-suicide or something even more disturbing. The presence of the handgun near David's remains initially suggested he had shot his wife to end her suffering, then taken his own life. Yet Santos, a veteran investigator with 22 years of experience, had learned to distrust obvious explanations when physical evidence contradicted witness statements. David's journal portrayed a man devoted to his wife's welfare, recording detailed observations about her condition and their dwindling supplies with scientific precision. Nothing in his writing suggested the psychological state typically associated with mercy-killing decisions. The breakthrough came when forensic specialists began analyzing the final pages of David's waterproof notebook, using advanced imaging techniques designed to reveal impressions and erasures invisible to conventional examination. What they discovered would transform the entire understanding of what had happened in that remote cave during June 2015. Hidden beneath David's final entries, pressed into the paper by the force of his writing, were additional words written in a different style. The impressions were faint but legible under specialized lighting, Morse code patterns that David had apparently transcribed using the system of dots and dashes he had learned during his engineering training. The message, when decoded, revealed a truth so shocking that investigators initially questioned their own findings. Not accident, being watched by someone known. Sarah's brother, Mike, knows our secret. The implications of this coded message were staggering. David hadn't simply recorded their struggle for survival, he had documented evidence of foul play hidden in a format that only someone with technical knowledge could decipher. Yet why would Mike Martinez, Sarah's older brother, be connected to their deaths? And what secret could have motivated such a horrific crime? Detective Santos immediately launched a comprehensive investigation into Mike Martinez's background and his relationship with Sarah and David. What she discovered painted a picture of family tensions and financial disputes that had been carefully hidden from public view during the original search efforts. Mike Martinez, 39 years old in 2015, had been struggling with gambling debts and a failing construction business when his sister and brother-in-law disappeared. Financial records revealed that he had borrowed heavily from family savings accounts managed by David, who served as the unofficial financial advisor for the extended Martinez family. More significantly, David had recently discovered discrepancies in the accounts that suggested Mike had been embezzling money to cover his gambling losses. Bank records showed that in the weeks before Sarah and David's hiking trip, David had confronted Mike about the missing funds and threatened to report the theft to the authorities unless the money was immediately repaid. The confrontation had occurred during a family barbecue on the 28th of May, 2015, just 2 weeks before the couple's disappearance. Several family members later recalled tension between the two men, though none had understood its cause at the time. The investigation revealed that Mike had known about Sarah and David's hiking plans in detail, including their exact route and timing. As Sarah's brother, he was one of the few people privy to their itinerary and the location where they typically camped along the Lamar River Trail. More disturbing still, mobile phone records showed that Mike's phone had been active in the Yellowstone region on the 12th of June, 2015, the same day his sister and brother-in-law had disappeared. Yet the most shocking revelation came when investigators re-examined Mike's role during the original search operation. Not only had he been the first family member to contact authorities about the missing couple, he had also volunteered extensively with the search teams, spending days in the wilderness, ostensibly looking for his missing sister and brother-in-law. Santos realized that Mike's intimate involvement in the search effort had provided him with perfect cover to return to the scene of his crime and eliminate evidence. His knowledge of the search patterns and areas being investigated would have allowed him to avoid detection whilst accessing the remote cave where Sarah and David had died. Forensic analysis of the handgun found in the cave provided the final piece of evidence needed to build a case against Mike. Martinez. Fingerprint analysis revealed partial prints that matched Mike's records from a background check conducted when he had applied for a concealed carry permit in 2013. The weapon itself was registered to Mike, though he had reported it stolen during a burglary of his home in March 2015, conveniently providing him with an alibi for its presence at the crime scene. Ballistics examination confirmed that the bullet fragments found in the cave had been fired from Mike's gun, and trajectory analysis indicated that Sarah had been shot whilst lying down, possibly unconscious or too weak to defend herself. The physical evidence painted a horrifying picture of betrayal and cold-blooded murder, motivated by greed and desperation. Reconstructing the crime proved challenging. Yet investigators developed a working theory based on the available evidence. Mike had followed Sarah and David into the wilderness on the 12th of June, possibly intending only to intimidate them into silence about his financial crimes. The severe storm that struck that afternoon had provided unexpected cover for his actions, isolating the couple from potential rescue and creating conditions that could easily explain their disappearance. The landslide that trapped Sarah and David in the cave might have been partially natural, but investigators suspected that Mike had deliberately set off further rockfalls to trap his victims completely, ensuring there was no possible escape. With the couple now helpless and utterly trapped, his scheme, as it seemed, was to stage their deaths, making it appear as a murder-suicide. The plan was that he would shoot Sarah, and then David would be blamed for her death. However, Mike had sorely underestimated David's engineering expertise and his unwavering determination to document the truth. Even when faced with his own death, David had managed to record evidence of his brother-in-law's guilt in coded form, creating a lasting testament that would survive long enough to bring the crime to light. The somewhat incomplete staging of the scene suggested that Mike had been forced to make a quick getaway before he could properly finish covering his tracks, possibly because of the relentless storm, or perhaps due to the fear of approaching search teams. What was most chilling about Mike's crime was the decade-long deception he maintained after the murders. Not only had he participated extensively in all the search efforts, but he had also provided comfort to Lisa during her years filled with grief and uncertainty, all the while knowing exactly what had happened to her sister. His performance, acting as the grieving brother, had been so convincing that even the most experienced investigators had never once considered him a suspect. On August 15, 2025, precisely 10 years and 2 months after Sarah and David Thompson had disappeared, Mike Martinez was finally arrested at his construction office in Las Vegas, facing charges of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The arrest warrant detailed evidence that he had deliberately caused the deaths of his sister and brother-in-law to prevent his embezzlement being exposed, and that he had then participated in an elaborate cover-up that had gone on for over a decade. Mike's initial reaction to his arrest was to deny everything completely, claiming that he had never been in Yellowstone on the day of the murders and that someone else must have planted the evidence to frame him. However, when he was confronted with the fingerprint evidence found on his own gun, together with David's coded message identifying him as the perpetrator, his composure finally broke down. In a scene recorded by Detective Santos, Mike's facade of innocence finally crumbled. "I never meant for them to die. I just wanted to scare them, to make them understand what would happen to our family if they exposed me. The landslide was supposed to trap them temporarily, just long enough for me to convince them to stay quiet." Even in his confession, Mike continued to minimize his responsibility for the tragedy. He claimed that Sarah's death had been accidental, occurring when she had tried to attack him with a rock during their confrontation in the cave. The gun, he said, had discharged during their struggle. He insisted that killing her had been unintentional. David's subsequent death from dehydration and exposure was presented as an unfortunate consequence, rather than a deliberate murder. Detective Santos wasn't convinced by Mike's version of events. The physical evidence suggested premeditation, rather than a spontaneous act of violence, and David's coded message indicated that the couple had been under surveillance before their confrontation. More likely, Mike had carefully planned the murders, using the storm as cover and his intimate knowledge of their hiking habits to isolate them in a location where their bodies might never be found. The investigation also revealed the psychological toll that 10 years of deception had taken on Mike Martinez. Financial records showed increasingly erratic behavior, failed business ventures, and mounting gambling debts, suggesting that he had never resolved the problems that had motivated his original crimes. His participation in the annual memorial services for Sarah and David appeared to have been motivated as much by guilt as by the need to maintain his innocent facade. Lisa Martinez learned about her brother's arrest through a phone call from Detective Santos, receiving the devastating news in the very same kitchen where she had spent countless hours worrying about her missing sister. The revelation that Mike had been responsible for Sarah's death, and that he had comforted Lisa whilst knowing the truth, represented a betrayal far beyond anything she could have ever imagined. The case, that had begun as a missing persons investigation, evolved into a cold case mystery, and culminated in the discovery of tragic love and devotion in a remote cave, had finally revealed its darkest secret. Sarah and David Thompson had died not because of a natural disaster or accident, but because of human greed, deception, and the ultimate betrayal by someone they had trusted with their lives. The trial of Mike Martinez began on March 15, 2026 in the federal courthouse in Cheyenne, Wyoming, drawing national media attention and bringing closure to one of America's most enduring missing persons cases. After 10 years of questions, speculation, and heartbreak, the truth about Sarah and David Thompson's disappearance would finally be laid bare before a jury of 12 citizens, who would determine whether justice could still be served after so much time had passed. Prosecutor Janet Holloway opened the state's case with a methodical presentation of evidence, painting Mike Martinez not as a grieving brother, but as a calculating killer who had murdered his own sister to protect his financial crimes. The prosecution's case relied heavily on forensic evidence, financial records, and David Thompson's coded journal entries that had somehow survived a decade in the wilderness cave. The most powerful moment of the trial came when Detective Maria Santos read aloud David's final journal entries. His words of love and devotion to Sarah echoed through the silent courtroom. When she reached the decoded Morse message that identified Mike as their killer, several jurors visibly reacted with shock and disgust. The contrast between David's obvious love for his wife and Mike's betrayal of his sister created an emotional foundation that would influence every subsequent piece of testimony. Mike's defense attorney, Charles Brennan, faced the almost impossible task of explaining away the fingerprint evidence, the cell phone records, and his client's own partial confession. Brennan's strategy centered on portraying Mike as a desperate man, whose financial crimes had spiraled beyond his control, leading to a confrontation that resulted in accidental deaths rather than premeditated murder. "My client made terrible financial decisions," Brennan told the jury during his opening statement. "He borrowed money he couldn't repay. And when David Thompson discovered these debts, Mike panicked. What happened in the cave was the result of desperation and poor judgment, not cold-blooded murder." The deaths of Sarah and David Thompson were a tragedy, but they were not the result of a calculated plan to kill. The defense strategy proved inadequate against the weight of forensic evidence. FBI ballistics expert Dr. Robert Chen testified that the bullet trajectory analysis indicated Sarah had been shot whilst lying down, possibly unconscious or too weak to defend herself. This testimony directly contradicted Mike's claim that the shooting had occurred during a struggle in which Sarah had attacked him. Perhaps most damaging to the defense was the testimony of financial crimes specialist agent Jennifer Walsh, who detailed the extent of Mike's embezzlement from family accounts. Walsh's analysis revealed that Mike had stolen nearly $75,000 over a 2-year period, using sophisticated methods to hide his theft from the family's trusted financial advisor, David Thompson. The defendant wasn't just stealing money, Walsh testified, he was stealing from his own family, betraying the trust of people who loved him. When David Thompson began asking questions about discrepancies in the accounts, Mike Martinez faced exposure that would have destroyed his relationships with everyone he claimed to care about. The prosecution also called Lisa Martinez to testify. Though her appearance on the witness stand proved to be one of the trial's most emotionally difficult moments, Lisa had to describe not only her 10-year ordeal of not knowing what had happened to her sister, but also the devastating realization that her own brother had been responsible for Sarah's death, whilst comforting Lisa through her grief. "He held me while I cried," Lisa told the packed courtroom, her voice barely audible. "Every year at the memorial service, he would put his arm around me and tell me that Sarah and David were at peace. All those years, he knew exactly where they were, because he had put them there." The defense's attempts to cross-examine Lisa were met with obvious hostility from the jury, who clearly viewed her as a victim, rather than simply a witness. When Brennan suggested that Lisa might have been mistaken about Mike's behavior during the search years, several jurors visibly bristled at the implication that she was somehow unreliable in her grief. Mike Martinez himself chose not to testify, a decision that surprised many observers, who had expected him to offer a more detailed explanation of his actions. Legal experts speculated that his previous partial confession to Detective Santos had made it too risky for him to take the stand, where prosecutors would have been able to challenge any new version of events with his recorded statements. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: first-degree murder in the death of Sarah Thompson, second-degree murder in the death of David Thompson, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The relatively quick verdict reflected the overwhelming nature of the evidence against Mike, and the jury's revulsion at his decade-long deception. Judge Margaret Foster sentenced Mike Martinez to life in prison without the possibility of parole, noting that his crimes went far beyond the murders themselves, to encompass a systematic betrayal of family trust that had caused immeasurable additional suffering. The defendant didn't just kill his sister and brother-in-law, Judge Foster stated during sentencing, he robbed their family of closure, participating in search efforts whilst knowing his victims were dead, comforting relatives whilst concealing his own guilt. The callousness required to maintain such deception for 10 years demonstrates a complete absence of the remorse that might otherwise justify a more lenient sentence. The conclusion of Mike Martinez's trial marked the end of one phase of healing for the Thompson and Martinez families, but the beginning of another. Lisa faced the complex task of grieving not only her sister's murder, but also the loss of her brother to a life sentence in federal prison. The revelation of Mike's guilt had answered the questions that had haunted her for 10 years, but it had also destroyed her understanding of her own family. On June 12, in the 2020s, exactly 11 years after Sarah and David's disappearance, Lisa organized a final memorial service at the Lamar River trailhead. This gathering was different from the previous annual remembrances, serving not only to honor Sarah and David's memory, but also to provide closure for the community that had invested so much emotional energy in the search for answers. The service drew more than 200 people, including many of the original searchers who had spent days looking for the missing couple. Jake Mitchell, the retired search and rescue coordinator who had overseen the 2015 operation, spoke about the dedication and love that Sarah and David had shown for each other, even in their final moments. Their story reminds us that love endures, even in the darkest circumstances, Mitchell told the assembled mourners. David Thompson's determination to document the truth, even facing death, ensured that justice would eventually be served. Their love for each other, and Sarah's love for her family, transcended even this terrible betrayal. Lisa had chosen to have Sarah and David's remains interred together in a small cemetery overlooking the Gallatin Valley, not far from the Bozeman home where they had planned their hiking adventures. The headstone bore a simple inscription: Sarah and David Thompson. Together in wilderness, together in love, together in peace. The Thompson case prompted significant changes in Yellowstone search and rescue procedures, with new protocols designed to ensure that evidence preservation wouldn't be compromised by well-meaning volunteers who might inadvertently disturb crime scenes. The National Park Service also implemented enhanced training for staff to recognize signs that missing persons cases might involve foul play rather than natural disasters. More broadly, the case became a cautionary tale about the dangers of assuming that wilderness disappearances necessarily result from environmental hazards. Law enforcement agencies across the country began re-examining cold cases involving missing hikers, looking for patterns that might suggest human involvement rather than natural causes. For Lisa Martinez, the resolution of her sister's case brought a form of peace she had never expected to experience. The questions that had consumed 10 years of her life had finally been answered, allowing her to begin processing her grief in a more complete way. The betrayal by her brother remained a source of profound pain, but knowing the truth was preferable to the endless uncertainty that had defined her existence since 2015. In her final statement to the media following Mike's sentencing, Lisa reflected on the lessons learned from her family's ordeal. Sarah and David taught us that love can endure even the worst circumstances. They faced death together, supporting each other until the very end. Mike's betrayal was terrible, but it couldn't diminish the love they shared, or the impact they had on everyone who knew them. The Yellowstone mystery, that had captivated true crime enthusiasts, generated countless theories, and inspired podcast episodes and documentary investigations, was finally resolved. But the resolution came with a sobering reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come not from the wilderness itself, but from the darkness that can exist within human hearts. Sarah Elizabeth Thompson and David Michael Thompson had entered Yellowstone National Park on June 12, 2015. As experienced hikers, prepared for a routine adventure in one of America's most beautiful wilderness areas, they became victims not of nature's unpredictability, but of human greed, deception, and the ultimate betrayal of family trust. Their story serves as both a tribute to enduring love and a warning that the most dangerous predators sometimes wear familiar faces and speak with trusted voices. In the end, the wilderness of Yellowstone had kept their secret for exactly 10 years, but it could not keep it forever. Truth, like love, has a way of surviving even the darkest circumstances, waiting patiently for its moment to emerge into the light. The mountains of Yellowstone continue to challenge and inspire visitors from around the world. Their beauty unmarked by the tragedy that unfolded in one small cave during a long-ago storm. But for those who remember Sarah and David Thompson, the wilderness will always carry the reminder that preparation and experience are not always enough to protect against the greatest danger of all, the betrayal of those we trust most deeply. The last photograph Sarah Thompson ever put on Instagram showed her beaming smile against the backdrop of Yellowstone's entrance sign. Yellowstone calling, ready for adventure with my love. Read the caption beneath the image of her and David, both wearing their matching navy hiking jackets and wide grins. 52 people liked the post. Several friends commented with encouraging messages. Stay safe out there, and can't wait to see the photos. None of them could have imagined that this cheerful snapshot, uploaded at 8:47 a.m. on the 12th of June, 2015, would become the final digital trace of Sarah Thompson's existence. 10 years later, when the truth finally emerged from the depths of a forgotten cave, it would shatter everything her family thought they knew about that fateful weekend. The revelation would prove that sometimes the greatest dangers lurk not in the wilderness, but in the hearts of those we trust most. Sarah Elizabeth Thompson, 35 years old, was not the sort of person who took unnecessary